Marcus Chen's eyes opened slowly, his head pounding with the dull ache of too many whiskey shots and not enough water. The living room ceiling came into focus above him, the familiar crack in the corner that he kept meaning to fix, but never did. He was on the couch again, which wasn't unusual these days. Ever since his daughter, Emma, started having nightmares, he'd taken to sleeping out here so she could have his bed when she crawled in scared at 2 in the morning. But something felt different this time. The apartment was too quiet, and there was a smell in the air that didn't belong, something expensive and floral that cut through the usual mix of leftover pizza and his daughter's strawberry shampoo. He sat up slowly, his back protesting from another night on the cheap IKEA couch that had seen better days. His shirt was missing. That was the first thing he noticed. He was sitting there in just his undershirt and jeans from yesterday, which he'd apparently fallen asleep in. The second thing he noticed was the sound of movement from the kitchen, the soft clink of ceramic on granite that made his blood run cold. Emma was at her grandmother's house for the weekend. He lived alone. Well, he was supposed to be alone. Marcus stood up quickly, too quickly, and the room spun for a second before settling. He grabbed the first thing he could find as a weapon, which turned out to be one of Emma's plastic toy swords, but he held it anyway as he moved toward the kitchen. The events of last night were coming back to him in fragments, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. There had been the hospital fundraiser, the one his sister had dragged him to because she worked in the development office and needed bodies to fill seats at the tables. He remembered feeling out of place in his one good suit, the one he'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago and had worn exactly twice since then. He remembered the open bar, which had seemed like a good idea at the time. He remembered a woman, beautiful and sharp-edged, who'd been sitting at the bar alone despite the fact that everyone else was networking and schmoozing in clusters. She'd been drinking whiskey, neat, and when he'd sat down next to her with his beer, she'd looked at him like he was something interesting instead of something to be pitied. They'd talked, God, they'd talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about his daughter and her company, about his dead wife and her absent parents, about dreams that had died and dreams that kept them awake at night. She'd told him her name was Victoria, and he'd known even through the alcohol haze that she was someone important, someone who didn't usually spend fundraiser nights talking to single dads who worked as freelance graphic designers from home. But she had talked to him, and somewhere around the third whiskey, he'd made her laugh, really laugh, and the sound had been like music he'd forgotten existed, and then things got fuzzy. He remembered her saying something about not wanting to drive, about calling a car, about him offering her his couch because the fundraiser had run late, and she'd mentioned living on the other side of the city. He remembered stumbling into his apartment with her, remembered being acutely aware of how small and messy it was compared to whatever penthouse she probably lived in. He remembered her kicking off her heels in the entryway, remembered the way she'd looked around his apartment with an expression he couldn't quite read, and then nothing, blank space where memories should be. Marcus rounded the corner into the kitchen and froze. She was there, Victoria, standing in his kitchen like she belonged there, like she'd always been there, wearing his favorite old college t-shirt, the one that said Stanford Engineering in faded red letters. It hit her mid-thigh, and her legs were bare beneath it. She was holding one of his mismatched mugs, the one Emma had painted for him at a craft fair, with her perfectly manicured hands, and she was staring out his kitchen window at the morning traffic below. She turned when she heard him, and the expression on her face made him forget about the toy sword in his hand, forget about his missing shirt, forget about everything except the fact that this woman looked like she was about to tell him something that would change everything. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was softer than he remembered from last night, less sharp around the edges. "We need to talk." He noticed 3 things in quick succession. First, she'd made coffee, and not just any coffee, but the good stuff from the expensive beans his sister had given him for Christmas that he'd been saving. Second, there were 2 mugs on the counter, which meant she'd made him one too. And third, she looked scared, not nervous, not uncomfortable, scared. Victoria Hartwell, the woman who, according to last night's drunken conversation, ran a tech company worth $300 million, looked genuinely frightened, standing in his kitchen wearing his shirt. "What happened last night?" Marcus asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He set down the toy sword, feeling ridiculous now. Victoria took a sip of her coffee, buying time, and he watched her throat work as she swallowed. Nothing happened, she said finally. Not what you're thinking anyway. You were a perfect gentleman. You gave me the couch, took Emma's room for yourself, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, you sleepwalked out here and passed out while I was getting water. I covered you with a blanket. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment. Then why are you wearing my shirt? Because I spilled wine on my dress last night, and it needed to dry clean out, she said simply. You offered me something to sleep in before you passed out. This was hanging on the bathroom door. That made sense. That was something drunk Marcus would do. But it didn't explain the look on her face, the tension in her shoulders, the way she was gripping that coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Victoria, he said slowly. What's wrong? She set down the mug carefully, precisely, like she was buying herself another few seconds. When she looked up at him, her eyes were different than they'd been last night. Last night they'd been guarded, professional, the eyes of someone who'd learned not to let people see too much. Now they were open, vulnerable, and absolutely terrified. Victoria Hartwell had built her company from nothing, had pitched to rooms full of venture capitalists who tried to tear her ideas apart, had fired people twice her age who'd underestimated her, and she'd done it all without flinching. But standing in Marcus Chen's tiny kitchen, wearing his college t-shirt and yesterday's jewelry, she felt more exposed than she'd ever felt in her life. She'd practiced this moment in her head a dozen times since she'd woken up 2 hours ago on his uncomfortable couch, but now that he was standing there looking at her with those confused, kind eyes, all her carefully prepared words evaporated. I need to tell you something, she started, then stopped, took a breath, tried again. Last night when we were talking, I told you things I've never told anyone, about my company, about my life, about the choices I've made. Marcus moved closer, and she noticed he was still barefoot, still wearing yesterday's jeans, his hair sticking up in directions that would have been comical if this moment weren't so heavy. I remember, he said softly, you told me about starting your company in your apartment, about the investors who said you'd fail, about working 100-hour weeks for 3 years straight. She nodded, surprised he remembered the details through the alcohol haze. What I didn't tell you, she continued, her voice steadier now, is why I was really at that fundraiser last night. It wasn't for networking or publicity. It was because 5 years ago that hospital saved my life, and I've been donating anonymously ever since. Marcus waited, not pushing, just present in that way he'd been last night, like he had all the time in the world to listen. I had cancer, Victoria said, and the words felt strange in her mouth even after all these years. Ovarian cancer, stage 3, diagnosed 6 months after my company got its first major investment. I had a choice to make: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, all of it happening during the most critical growth period of my business. My board wanted me to step down temporarily. My investors were nervous. My competitors were circling like sharks. She paused, looking down at the coffee in her hands, at the childish painting of flowers that Emma had done on the mug. I had the surgery. They removed everything. Both ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, everything that might have cancer and everything that might develop it later. I was back at work 3 weeks after surgery, running board meetings from my hospital bed during chemo. I never stepped down. I never showed weakness, and I never told anyone outside my immediate medical team what I was going through. Marcus's face had changed, softened with understanding, and something else, something that looked like respect. That's why you were drinking alone at the bar, he said. 5-year anniversary, 5 years cancer-free, she confirmed. They call it remission, but really it's just 5 years of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I realized last night, sitting there at that fundraiser surrounded by people I do business with, but don't actually know, that I've spent 5 years building an empire but not a life. She set down the coffee mug and turned to face him fully. Then I met you and you were so genuine, so real. You told me about Emma, about your wife dying in that car accident when your daughter was 2, about how you gave up your dream job at a big firm to work from home, so you could raise her yourself. You showed me pictures of her artwork on your phone. You talked about her like she was the most important thing in the world, and I could tell you meant it, not the way people usually talk about their kids, like their accessories or achievements, but like she was your entire universe. Marcus's eyes were wet now, and he didn't bother hiding. She is my universe, he said simply. Victoria felt her own tears threatening and pushed forward before she lost her nerve. I told you all this last night, Marcus. I told you about the cancer, about the surgery, about what it meant, and you know what you said to me. He shook his head, clearly not remembering. You said that family wasn't just about biology, that love was about choice, that the most important relationships were the ones we built, not the ones we were born into. You told me about how Emma wasn't yours biologically, how your wife had been artificially inseminated before you met her, how you'd chosen to love that little girl every single day, even though you weren't her genetic father, and how that choice made you more of a father than genetics ever could. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, the memory clearly coming back to him. I was pretty drunk, he said quietly. I don't usually tell people that. Emma doesn't even know yet. I know, Victoria said, and that's why I need to tell you this now, while I still have the courage. Marcus, I can't have children. The cancer took that possibility away, before I even knew I wanted it. For 5 years I've told myself it doesn't matter, that I have my company, my success, my money, and that's enough. But last night, listening to you talk about Emma, watching you show me her drawings on your phone like they were precious artifacts, I realized something that terrified me. She moved closer to him, knelt down so they were eye level. I want that. I want what you have with Emma, not the biology, but the choice, the daily decision to love someone more than yourself, and meeting you, talking to you, seeing how you live your life with purpose and presence despite everything you've lost. It broke something open in me that I've kept locked away for 5 years. Marcus reached out and took her hand, his palm rough against her soft skin. Victoria, what are you saying? I'm saying that I'm 42 years old. I run a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I have a penthouse apartment and a summer house and more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and none of it matters because I'm completely alone. I'm saying that last night was the first time in 5 years that I felt like a human being instead of a CEO. I'm saying that you and Emma, a family built on choice instead of biology, you represent everything I thought I'd lost when they took out my organs and saved my life. And I'm saying that this terrifies me, because I met you 12 hours ago, and I shouldn't feel this way, but I do. Marcus felt like the ground had shifted beneath him, like the entire world had tilted on its axis while he was sleeping on his couch. This woman, this successful, brilliant, terrifying woman, was sitting in his kitchen telling him things that people usually took years to reveal. You don't know me, he said finally, but his hand was still holding hers, and he made no move to let go. We talked for a few hours at a bar. You're probably just feeling vulnerable because of the anniversary, because of what the night represented. This isn't real. Victoria smiled, and it was sad, and knowing at the same time. You're probably right, she said. Probably in a week I'll go back to my real life and you'll go back to yours, and this will just be a strange story we tell ourselves sometimes. But Marcus, I've spent 5 years being practical, being careful, protecting myself from exactly this kind of feeling, and last night, for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt alive, not surviving. Alive. She stood up and Marcus noticed how small she looked in his shirt, how different from the polished executive she probably was in her real life. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me, she continued. I'm not asking you to introduce me to Emma, or change your life or do anything dramatic. I'm just asking if I can see you again, if we can have coffee, really have coffee, sober and in daylight, and see if last night was just alcohol and anniversary emotions, or if it was something real. Marcus stood too, and found himself moving closer to her without consciously deciding to. Victoria, I'm a single dad living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that's being gentrified around me. I work from home doing freelance design work that barely pays the bills. My daughter is the center of my universe, and she always will be. I don't have time for casual dating or complicated relationships. Everything I do has to be about what's best for Emma. I know, Victoria said. You told me all that last night too. You told me about how you'd turned down a job at Google 2 years ago because it would have meant moving to California and taking Emma away from her grandmother. You told me about how you screen every woman you date carefully because you won't let anyone into Emma's life who might leave. You told me that you'd rather be alone forever than risk your daughter getting hurt. Marcus felt exposed, realizing how much he'd revealed in his drunken state. Then you know this is crazy, he said. You know this can't work. I know it's crazy, Victoria agreed. I know the odds are against us. I know we're from completely different worlds. I know you need stability and I need to figure out what I want beyond my company. I know all of. She moved even closer, close enough that he could smell the coffee on her breath, mixed with whatever expensive perfume she'd been wearing last night. But I also know that I haven't felt this alive in 5 years, and I'm not ready to let that go without at least trying to understand what it means. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking about Emma, about his carefully constructed life, about all the walls he'd built to protect both of them from more loss. When he opened them, Victoria was still there, still looking at him with that vulnerable, terrified expression that he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. "One coffee," he said finally. "One real conversation, sober, with both of us being completely honest about what this could and couldn't be. And if after that we both still think there's something here, we move forward, carefully, slowly, with Emma's well-being as the top priority." Victoria's face broke into a smile that transformed her completely, made her look younger and less guarded. "One coffee," she agreed. "When?" "Today," Marcus said impulsively. "Emma's at her grandmother's until tomorrow afternoon. If we're going to do this, let's not give ourselves time to talk ourselves out of it. Let's see if this feeling survives the morning light." Victoria laughed, and it was the same sound he remembered from last night, the one that had made him feel like maybe life could surprise him in good ways again. "I have a board meeting at 2, she said, "but I can do brunch. There's a place downtown, Rosemary's. They have private booths in the back where we won't be interrupted." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A place where you won't be recognized by business associates, you mean?" "Exactly," Victoria said without embarrassment. "I'm not hiding you, Marcus. I'm protecting this, whatever this is, from becoming gossip before we even understand it ourselves." That made sense, and Marcus appreciated the honesty. "Rosemary's at 11, he said. "And Victoria, wear your own clothes. Not that you don't look good in my shirt, but I think we need to see each other as we really are, not as whoever we were pretending to be last night." She nodded, understanding what he meant. "I'll send a car to pick you up at 10:45, she said. "And Marcus, thank you for not throwing me out when you woke up confused with a stranger in your kitchen. Thank you for not taking advantage of drunk me," he countered. "I was apparently very forthcoming last night." "You were honest," Victoria corrected. "There's a difference. And for what it's worth, everything you told me last night made me like you more, not less." She moved past him toward the living room where her dress was presumably hanging somewhere dry. Marcus followed and watched as she gathered her things with practiced efficiency, transforming from the vulnerable woman in his kitchen back into someone who looked like they ran the world. At his door she paused with her hand on the handle, turned back to face him. "Marcus, last night you asked me what I would do if I could start over, if I could build my life differently knowing what I know now. Do you remember what I said?" He shook his head. "I said I'd try to find someone who chose to love me for reasons that had nothing to do with what I could give. Someone who chose me the way you chose Emma, deliberately and completely, despite all the reasons it might be difficult." She opened the door, stepped into the hallway, then looked back one more time. "I think maybe I found that person, and that terrifies me more than cancer ever." Rosemary's was exactly the kind of place Marcus had never been to before, the kind where the host knew Victoria by name and led them to a private booth in the back without being asked, where the menu didn't have prices, and the coffee came in delicate porcelain cups that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. He felt out of place in his one good button-down shirt, the same one he'd worn to the fundraiser, but Victoria had looked genuinely happy to see him when the car had picked him up, so maybe it didn't matter as much as he thought it did. They ordered coffee and sat in silence for a moment, both of them apparently realizing that sober conversation was going to be different than drunk confessions at a bar. Victoria looked different too, back in her armor of expensive clothes and perfect makeup, her hair styled in a way that probably required professional help, but when she smiled at him across the table, he could still see glimpses of the woman who'd stood in his kitchen that morning looking scared and hopeful. "This is weird," Marcus said finally, because someone had to acknowledge it. Victoria laughed, some of the tension breaking. "This is extremely weird," she agreed. "I don't think I've been on a first date in 10 years, and I'm not even sure this counts as a first date given that we've already seen each other in our pajamas. I don't think my college t-shirt counts as pajamas," Marcus said. "But point taken. So how do we do this? Do we start over and pretend last night didn't happen, Or do we acknowledge that we already know each other's deepest secrets and move forward from there? Victoria considered this, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup in a gesture that seemed more about comfort than warmth. I think we acknowledge it, she said. Otherwise, we're just going to spend the whole time dancing around what we already know, and that seems exhausting. Marcus nodded, relieved. Okay then, let's start with the obvious question. Why me? You could date anyone. CEOs, doctors, lawyers, people who actually belong in places like this. Why are you interested in a single dad who works from home and can barely afford his rent? Victoria didn't flinch from the directness of the question. Because everyone else wants something from me, she said simply. They want connections or investment capital, or the prestige of dating someone successful. Last night, you didn't even ask what my company does. You asked me if I was happy. Marcus remembered that now, the moment when he'd looked at her sitting at that bar surrounded by people but completely alone, and had seen something familiar in her eyes. Were you, he asked, happy? No, Victoria said. I'm successful, I'm wealthy, I'm respected in my industry. But happy? I don't think I've been truly happy since before my diagnosis, maybe not even then. I've been so focused on building something, on proving something, that I forgot to actually. She looked at him directly, and he saw that vulnerability again, the one that had made him agree to this brunch. And then you showed me pictures of your daughter's artwork on your phone like they were masterpieces, and you talked about how she'd learned to ride her bike last month and you'd run behind her for 2 hours until your legs ached. And I realized that you have something I've spent 5 years telling myself I don't need. You have purpose that isn't about achievement or success. You have love that isn't transactional. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Emma is everything to me, he said. But Victoria, that means anyone who wants to be in my life has to understand that they're never going to be the center of my universe. Emma is all I know, Victoria said. And honestly, that's part of what attracts me to you. You have your priorities straight in a way most people don't. You've already figured out what matters. She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. I told you this morning that I can't have biological children. What I didn't tell you is that I've spent 5 years convincing myself I didn't want children at all, because it was easier than admitting I'd lost something before I even knew I wanted it. Meeting you, hearing you talk about Emma, it broke through that defense mechanism. Marcus felt the weight of what she was saying. Victoria, I need you to be really clear about what you're looking for. Are you interested in me, or are you interested in the idea of being part of a ready-made family? Because I won't let Emma get attached to someone who's using her to fill a void. Victoria's eyes flashed, and for the first time he saw a hint of the steel that had built a tech empire. I'm not using anyone, she said firmly. I'm being honest about the fact that meeting you made me realize I want things I'd written off. Yes, seeing you with Emma made me wonder what it would be like to be part of something like that. But Marcus, I haven't even met your daughter. I'm interested in you first, in getting to know you, in seeing if what happened last night was real chemistry or just a moment of vulnerability. The rest, the family part, that's so far down the road we can't even see it from here. Marcus relaxed slightly. Okay, he said. I'm sorry for jumping on you about that. I'm protective. You should be, Victoria said. If you weren't, I'd be worried about your judgment. Their food arrived then, elaborate brunch dishes that Marcus couldn't have pronounced correctly, but when he took a bite he had to admit it was incredible. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Victoria spoke again. Tell me about your wife, she said. Tell me about how you ended up being a single father to a daughter who isn't biologically yours. Marcus set down his fork, surprised by the directness but appreciating it. Her name was Sarah. Marcus traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger, gathering his thoughts. Talking about Sarah never got easier, but somehow sitting across from Victoria, he felt like he could be honest without drowning in the grief. Sarah and I met in college, sophomore year design class. She was brilliant, creative in ways that made everything she touched turn into art. We fell in love fast, the kind of love where you just know this person is going to change your entire life. We got married right after graduation, both of us convinced we were going to take the design world by storm together. He smiled at the memory, at how young and naive they'd been, but life had other plans. Sarah got offered an incredible position at a firm in New York, and I got accepted to a master's program here in Seattle. We did long distance for 2 years, and it nearly killed us. When we finally got back to the same city, we were different people than when we'd started, still in love, but changed. Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression open and compassionate in a way that made it easier to continue. Sarah wanted kids desperately, always had, but when we finally started trying, nothing happened. Months went by, then a year, then 2 years. We went through all the tests, saw all the specialists, and finally got the diagnosis that broke her heart. The issue was with me: low sperm count, poor motility, a bunch of medical terms that all added up to the same thing. I couldn't give her the children she'd always dreamed of. Marcus paused, the old guilt rising up like it always did. I offered to try IVF, to do whatever it took, but the odds were terrible and the cost was astronomical. Sarah made the decision that she wanted to try artificial insemination with a donor. She said it didn't matter to her that the baby wouldn't be genetically mine, that we'd be raising it together, and that's what mattered. I agreed because I loved her, and I wanted her to be happy, but honestly I had doubt. I worried that I wouldn't be able to love a child that wasn't biologically mine the way I should. Victoria's hand moved across the table slowly, and she placed it over his. The gesture was simple but grounding. Emma was born on a Tuesday in March. Marcus continued, his voice softer now. Sarah had a difficult pregnancy, complications near the end that scared us both. When they finally placed that tiny screaming baby in my arms, everything I'd worried about just disappeared. I looked at her face, all scrunched up and red, and I fell completely in love. It didn't matter that she didn't have my DNA. She was mine from that moment, chosen deliberately, loved intentionally. He blinked back tears, not caring if Victoria saw them. The first 2 years were hard, but beautiful. Sarah struggled with postpartum depression, but we got through it together. Emma was everything to both of us, this perfect little person who needed us completely. We were finally figuring out how to be a family when Sarah decided she wanted to visit her parents in California for a week, give herself a break, reconnect with her mom. I stayed home with Emma because I was between projects, and it made sense. Marcus's voice cracked slightly, and he had to stop for a moment. Victoria squeezed his hand, but didn't speak. The accident happened on Highway 5, just outside of Sacramento. Drunk driver crossed the median, head-on collision. Sarah died instantly. They told me she didn't suffer, but I don't know if that's true or if they just say that to make people feel better. Emma was 2 years old, too young to really remember her mother, which sometimes feels like a blessing and sometimes feels like the cruelest thing in the world. He looked up at Victoria, seeing his own pain reflected in her eyes. Her parents wanted custody. They argued that I wasn't her biological father, that I had no legal right to her because Sarah and I had never formally completed the adoption paperwork. We'd meant to, but with a new baby and life being chaotic, we'd kept putting it off. It turned into this ugly legal battle that lasted almost a year. They hired expensive lawyers, dragged up every mistake I'd ever made, painted me as an unfit parent who was only keeping Emma out of spite. Victoria's grip on his hand tightened. But you won, she said. I kept her, Marcus corrected. I don't know if I won. The judge ruled that Emma knew me as her father, that I'd been her primary caregiver since birth, that removing her from the only home she'd ever known would be traumatic. Sarah's parents were granted visitation rights, which is why Emma spends every other weekend with her grandmother. It's not ideal, but it works, and Emma loves her grandmother even if the relationship with her grandfather is complicated. He pulled his hand back gently and picked up his coffee, needing something to do with his hands. So that's my story, Victoria. I'm a widower, raising a daughter, who isn't mine biologically but is mine in every way that matters. I work from home because I need the flexibility to be there when she needs me. I live in a small apartment because most of my money goes to her needs. I don't date much because I won't introduce anyone into her life unless I'm absolutely certain they're going to stay. And I wear a wedding ring, even though Sarah has been gone for 4 years, because I'm not sure I'll ever really stop being married to her memory. Victoria was quiet for a long moment after he finished, processing everything he'd told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. I understand now why you were so direct with me this morning about needing to know my intentions. You've already lost one person, Emma thought was permanent. You won't let it happen again. I can't, Marcus said simply. She's been through enough. We both have. Victoria nodded slowly. Then I need to be equally direct with you, Marcus. I don't know where this goes. I don't know if what I felt last night was real connection, or just a moment of vulnerability on an emotional anniversary. I don't know if I'm capable of being part of someone's life the way you would need me to be. My company demands everything from me, and I've built my entire identity around being successful and independent. She leaned forward, her expression intense. But I want to try. I want to see if we can build something real, slowly and carefully. I want to know if the person I felt like I could be around you last night is someone I can actually become. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a pattern that felt both exhilarating and terrifying to Marcus. They met for coffee twice more, then dinner once when Emma was with her grandmother, then a walk through the park where they talked for 4 hours about everything from their favorite books to their biggest regrets. Victoria was different than he'd expected, funny and self-deprecating when she wasn't in CEO mode, passionate about things that had nothing to do with business. She told him about her love of old movies, about how she played piano to decompress, about her secret addiction to terrible reality television that she watched alone in her penthouse at midnight when she couldn't sleep. Marcus found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering what she was doing, whether she was thinking about him too. Emma noticed the change in him, asked him one morning why he was smiling at his phone, and Marcus had deflected with a joke about a funny email from a client. He wasn't ready to tell his daughter about Victoria yet, wasn't sure there would ever be a right time for that conversation, but then Victoria texted him on a Wednesday afternoon while he was helping Emma with her homework, asking if they could talk, saying it was important. Marcus felt his stomach drop, recognizing the tone even through text messages. Something had changed. They met at a coffee shop near his apartment, neutral territory, and the moment Marcus saw her face, he knew this wasn't going to be good news. Victoria looked tired, her usual polish dimmed by dark circles under her eyes that even expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. My board found out about us, she said without preamble, once they were seated in a corner booth. How? Marcus asked, though part of him had known this was inevitable. You couldn't date someone like Victoria Hartwell in a city this size without eventually being noticed. Someone saw us at the park last week, took a photo, sent it to a business journalist who's been trying to dig up stories about me for years. He called my PR team, asking for comment about my relationship with a mysterious single father. They managed to kill the story for now, but my board is concerned about optics. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Optics, he repeated. I'm bad optics. That's not what I said, Victoria protested, but he could see in her eyes that it was at least partly true. Marcus, you have to understand, I'm in the middle of negotiations for a major acquisition. My company is about to absorb a competitor, which means I'm under more scrutiny than usual. Every aspect of my personal life becomes relevant to investor confidence. My board is worried that a relationship with someone outside the tech world, someone who doesn't come from money or success, might make me seem less focused or less serious about business. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. So I'm a distraction. I'm the wrong kind of person to be seen with, because I don't add value to your professional image. That's not fair, Victoria said, and now there was steel in her voice. I'm trying to be honest with you about the complications, about the reality of dating someone in my position. I'm not saying I agree with their concerns, but I can't completely ignore them either. I have responsibilities to my company, to my employees, to the investors who took risks on me when I was nobody. Marcus looked at her across the table, at this woman he'd started to care about deeply, and saw the divide between their worlds more clearly than ever. Victoria, I get it. I do. But the thing is, I can't be with someone who sees me as a complication. Emma and I come as a package deal, and that package doesn't include pretending to be something we're not or hiding in the shadows, so we don't damage anyone's professional reputation. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and it was the first time he'd seen her really cry. I'm not asking you to hide, she said. I'm asking for time, for patience while I navigate this acquisition. Once it goes through in a few months, the pressure will ease, and we can figure out how to be together more publicly. I'm asking you to wait for me. Marcus wanted to say yes, wanted to give her what she needed, but he was thinking about Emma, about the conversation they'd had just that morning, where his daughter had asked him if he ever got lonely. He was thinking about the walls he'd built to protect both of them from more loss, walls that Victoria had somehow gotten him to lower, and now she was asking him to put them back up and wait behind them indefinitely. "I can't do that," he said quietly. "I can't be someone's secret, and more than that, I can't model that for Emma. I can't teach my daughter that love is something you hide when it's inconvenient or complicated. She's already lost one parent. She's already learned too many hard lessons about how life doesn't always work out the way you plan. I won't add to that by showing her that relationships are something you compartmentalize or keep separate from the rest of your life." Victoria was fully crying now, and Marcus felt his own tears threatening. "So what are you saying?" she asked. "Are you ending this before it really even starts?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand one last time. "I'm saying that I think you were right the first morning. In my kitchen, you said you needed to figure out what you want beyond your company. Victoria, I don't think you've done that yet. I think you're still letting your business define everything else in your life, including how and who you love. And until you figure that out, until you know what you actually want and are willing to fight for it regardless of what your board thinks, we can't do this." He stood up, knowing that if he stayed any longer he'd lose his resolve. "When you know what you want, when you're ready to choose something for yourself instead of for your company, you know where to find me. But Victoria, I need you to understand that I might not still be waiting. Emma deserves stability, and I can't keep hoping for something that might never happen." Victoria stood in her penthouse that night, looking out at the city lights spread below her like a galaxy, and felt more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. The acquisition papers were spread across her dining room table, documents that represented months of work, millions of dollars, and the culmination of everything she'd been building toward for years. She should have been celebrating, should have been calling her board members and toasting her success with expensive champagne. Instead, she was thinking about Marcus's face in that coffee shop, about the pain in his eyes when he'd told her he couldn't wait for someone who treated him like a complication. Phone buzzed with another congratulatory message from an investor, but she ignored it. She'd been ignoring most of her messages all day, going through the motions of board meetings and contract reviews while her mind was elsewhere. Her assistant had noticed, asked if she was feeling well, and Victoria had snapped at her in a way she'd never done before. Now she was alone with the success she'd fought so hard for, and it felt hollow. The cancer diagnosis 5 years ago had changed her, made her focused and driven, and absolutely committed to building something that would outlast her mortality. She'd thrown everything into her company, because it was something she could control, something that wouldn't leave her or die on her unexpectedly. But now she realized that somewhere in that process, she'd stopped living and started surviving. Marcus had seen through that, had called her out on it in the kindest possible way. He'd given her an ultimatum without really giving her one, had simply stated his boundaries and walked away when she couldn't meet them. Part of her was angry at him for not understanding the complexity of her situation, for not being willing to wait a few months while she navigated waters that could make or break her company. But a bigger part of her knew he was right. She was hiding behind her business, using it as an excuse not to take risks in her personal life, not to be vulnerable in ways that might actually matter. Her phone rang, and she saw her mother's name flash across the screen. Victoria almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Victoria, darling, I've been trying to reach you all day." Her mother's voice came through, bright and false in that way it always was. "I heard about the acquisition. Congratulations are in order." "Thanks, Mom," Victoria said, her voice. There was a pause on the other end, and when her mother spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. "You don't sound very happy about it." Victoria laughed, surprising herself with the bitterness in it. "I'm thrilled. I've spent 5 years building toward this moment. Why wouldn't I be happy?" "Victoria, I've known you for 42 years. I know when you're pretending." Her mother's voice was softer now, more genuine than Victoria had heard it in years. "What's really going on?" And suddenly Victoria was telling her everything, about Marcus and Emma, about falling for someone completely wrong for her professional image, about the board's concerns and her own fears, and the way Marcus had walked away when she'd asked him to wait. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Victoria wondered if this was real or if she'd finally cracked under the pressure and was hallucinating the whole conversation. When Victoria finally finished, there was a long silence. Then her mother spoke, and her words hit like a physical blow. You're making the same mistake I did. Victoria froze. What do you mean? Your father and I, we loved each other once. Did you know really loved each other? Before the money and the status and the social climbing took over everything else. But I chose security over love, chose appearances over authenticity, and we ended up in a marriage that looks perfect from the outside and feels empty from the inside. I never wanted that for you, Victoria. I wanted you to be braver than I was. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face now, years of unspoken pain between her and her mother finally coming to the surface. I don't know how to be brave, she admitted. I don't know how to choose something just because I want it instead of because it makes strategic sense. Then you learn, her mother said simply. You're the woman who built a company from nothing while going through chemotherapy. You're the woman who faced down venture capitalists and hostile board members and competitors who tried to destroy you. You're telling me you can't face down your own fear of being happy? Victoria looked around her penthouse, at all the trappings of success she'd accumulated, the awards and the expensive furniture, and the art she'd bought because it was valuable, not because she loved it. She thought about Marcus's tiny apartment with Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, about the way his face lit up when he talked about his daughter, about the simple, genuine life they'd built from tragedy and choice. What if I choose him and it doesn't work out? Victoria asked quiet. What if I give up everything I've built and he still doesn't want me? Then at least you'll have tried, her mother said. At least you'll have been brave enough to fight for something real. Victoria, success isn't just about business and money and power. Sometimes success is knowing what matters and having the courage to reach for it. After they hung up, Victoria stood at her window for a long time, watching the city breathe below her. Then she opened her laptop and began typing an email to her board, words that would change everything she'd spent 5 years building toward. Marcus woke up to Emma bouncing on his chest at 6 in the morning, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. Daddy, can we make pancakes? She asked, her eyes bright with that boundless morning energy that only children seem to possess. Sure, sweetheart, Marcus said, pushing aside thoughts of Victoria that had plagued his sleep. It had been 4 days since their conversation at the coffee shop, 4 days of radio silence that Marcus had tried to tell himself was for the best. He'd made his boundaries clear, and Victoria had made her choice. Now he just had to figure out how to stop thinking about her every 5 minutes. They were in the middle of pancake preparation, Emma standing on a chair to help pour batter while Marcus supervised, when there was a knock at the door. It was barely 7 in the morning, too early for deliveries or neighbors needing to borrow something. Marcus wiped his hands on a towel and went to answer it, expecting maybe his sister checking in on them before work. Instead, he opened the door to find Victoria standing in the hallway. She was wearing a business dress but looked like she hadn't slept, her hair slightly disheveled in a way that was completely unlike her usual polish. She was holding a bouquet of flowers and looked more terrified than he'd ever seen her. Victoria, he said, his heart immediately racing. What are you doing here? I quit, she said, and her voice was shaking. I sent my resignation to the board yesterday evening, effective in 30 days. I'm stepping down as CEO. Marcus felt like the ground had dropped out from beneath him. What? Victoria, no, you can't do that. Your company is everything to you. That's exactly the problem, Victoria said. My company was everything to me. It was my entire identity, my whole life, and I realized that's not actually living, that's just existing with expensive furniture. Marcus, you were right about everything. I was hiding behind my business, using it as an excuse not to take risks that actually matter, and I'm done doing that. Emma appeared at Marcus's side, curious about the visitor. Daddy, who is this? She asked, peering up at Victoria with open interest. Victoria looked down at Emma, and Marcus saw her expression shift into something softer, more genuine. Hi, she said, kneeling down so she was at Emma's eye level. You must be Emma. Your daddy has told me a lot about you. My name is Victoria, and I'm a friend of your dad's. Emma studied her seriously. Are you his girlfriend? She asked, with the blunt honesty of a 6-year-old. Marcus felt his face flush, but Victoria just smiled. I'd like to be, she said, looking up at Marcus. If your daddy will give me another chance. Marcus's mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. Victoria, You can't quit your company for me. That's too much. That's not what I was asking for. Victoria stood up, still holding the flowers. You weren't asking for anything, she said. That's what made it so clear what I needed to do, Marcus. You told me you couldn't model for Emma that love is something you hide or compromise or fit into the spaces between more important things. You were right. I've spent 5 years hiding from life, from feelings, from anything that might make me vulnerable, and I'm tired of it. She took a step closer to him, and Emma watched the interaction like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. I'm not quitting my company entirely, Victoria continued. I'm stepping down as CEO but staying on the board. I'm hiring someone to run the day-to-day operations while I figure out what I actually want my life to look like. And what I really want more than any business success or professional achievement, is to see if what we started can become something real. Marcus felt tears threatening, and didn't bother trying to hide them. Victoria, I can't promise you this will be easy. Emma and I are a package deal, and my life is chaotic and messy, and nothing like what you're used to. I know, Victoria said. I'm not asking for easy, I'm asking for real. I'm asking to be part of your life slowly and carefully, with Emma's well-being as the priority, just like you said. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can be brave enough to choose something just because I want it, not because it makes strategic sense. Emma tugged on Marcus's shirt. Daddy, I think you should let her be your girlfriend, she announced. She seems nice, and she brought flowers. Also, our pancake batter is probably ready now. Marcus laughed through his tears, looking down at his daughter, who had somehow become wise beyond her years. Then he looked back at Victoria, at this woman who had just turned her entire life upside down for the possibility of something neither of them could guarantee would work. Come inside, he said finally, stepping back to let her enter. We're making pancakes, and I think we need to have a long conversation about what this actually means, about boundaries and expectations, and how we navigate this with Emma's needs first. But Victoria, if you're really sure about this, if you're really willing to try, then yes, I want to give us another chance. Victoria stepped into the apartment, and Emma immediately grabbed her hand to pull her toward the kitchen. Do you like chocolate chips in your pancake? Emma asked seriously, because Daddy says too many is unhealthy, but I think that's a matter of opinion. Victoria looked back at Marcus, and the smile on her face was different than any he'd seen before, more open, more genuine, more alive. I think your opinion about chocolate chips is probably right, she told Emma, and I'm very interested in hearing your other opinions about things. As they walked toward the kitchen, Marcus following behind, he realized that his carefully constructed life was about to get a lot more complicated. But watching Victoria kneel down to help Emma with the pancake batter, seeing the way his daughter was already warming to her, Marcus thought that maybe complicated wasn't always bad. Maybe sometimes complicated was just another word for real and messy, and beautifully, terrifyingly human. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his kitchen, watching Victoria help Emma with a school project about community helpers, and marveled at how much had changed while somehow everything stayed fundamentally the same. The integration hadn't been easy or smooth. There had been awkward moments and difficult conversations, boundaries to establish and expectations to manage. Victoria had to learn how to be part of a family unit for the first time in her life, had to understand that not everything could be solved with money or efficiency, that sometimes Emma needed time to warm up to new experiences, that Marcus's protective instincts would always put his daughter first, but she'd learned, adapted, shown up consistently even when it was hard. She'd attended Emma's school play sitting in the audience with Marcus, had learned to make grilled cheese the way Emma liked it, had spent a Sunday afternoon teaching Emma basic piano chords in her penthouse when Emma had expressed interest in the instrument. She'd met Emma's grandmother and navigated that complicated relationship with grace, understanding that she wasn't trying to replace anyone, just add to the circle of people who loved this little girl. The board had been shocked by Victoria's resignation, but her carefully chosen successor was running the company well, and Victoria's role as board member kept her connected to the work she'd built without consuming her entire life. She'd started painting again, something she hadn't done since college, had joined a book club, had learned to balance professional success with personal fulfillment in ways she'd never imagined possible. Marcus had learned things too, had to confront his own fears about letting someone new into Emma's life, about trusting that Victoria wouldn't leave when things got difficult. He'd had to accept help when he'd spent years being fiercely independent, had to let Victoria contribute to their lives in meaningful ways, without feeling like he was compromising his integrity or taking advantage of her wealth. They'd established patterns and rhythm. Victoria came over twice a week for dinner, always bringing something for Emma, whether it was art supplies or books or just her full attention. She'd taken Marcus and Emma to the aquarium, to museums, to plays downtown, sharing her world while learning to appreciate theirs. She'd learned that Emma's bedtime routine was sacred, that Marcus needed space to work during the day, that some family traditions were too important to change. Now, watching Victoria help Emma carefully glue cotton balls onto a poster board to represent clouds while explaining what meteorologists do, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died: hope for the future. Emma looked up from her project, considering Victoria serious. "Victoria, can I ask you a question?" she said. "Of course," Victoria replied, setting down the glue stick to give Emma her full attention. "Are you going to stay?" Emma asked, and the directness of it made both adults free. "I mean, my mom died when I was really little, and Daddy says she loved me, but sometimes I don't remember her, and that makes me sad. And I really like you, but I don't want to like you too much if you're going to leave like my mom did." Marcus felt his heart break, hadn't realized Emma was carrying this fear. He moved to comfort her, but Victoria got there first, kneeling down to be at Emma's level with tears in her eyes. "Emma, I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen," Victoria said slowly, choosing her words with obvious care. "Your mom didn't want to leave you, and sometimes life is unfair in ways we can't control. But I can promise you that I'm choosing to be here. I'm choosing to be part of your life and your dad's life, because you both make me happier than I've been in a very long time, and as long as you and your dad want me around, I'm not going anywhere by choice." Emma studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "But can I ask you to promise something?" "Anything," Victoria said. "Promise that even if you and Daddy stop being boyfriend and girlfriend someday, you'll still be my friend, because I think you're really cool and I don't want to lose you even if grown-up stuff gets complicated." Victoria looked up at Marcus and he saw his own emotions reflected in her face. "I promise," she said to Emma. "You're stuck with me now, whether your dad likes it or not." Emma grinned. "I think he likes it," she said confidently. "He smiles at his phone a lot now, and he only does that when you text him. It's kind of gross but also kind of nice." Later that evening, after the project was finished and Emma was in bed, Marcus and Victoria sat on his couch with cups of tea, processing what had happened. "She really asked me to promise I'd stay," Victoria said quietly. "Even if we didn't work out romantically, she wanted me to promise I'd still be in her life. Is that okay?" Marcus asked, worried. "Is that too much pressure?" Victoria shook her head. "It's the most meaningful thing anyone has ever asked me to promise," she said. "Marcus, I meant what I told her. You and Emma have given me something I didn't know I was missing. A family built on choice instead of obligation. Love that's deliberate and daily instead of assumed." "I'm not going anywhere." Marcus pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you," he said, the first time either of them had spoken the words out loud. "I think I loved you from that first morning when you stood in my kitchen, looking terrified and hopeful at the same time." "I love you too," Victoria replied. "Both of you, and I'm going to spend every day proving that choosing you was the best decision I ever made." Through the wall they could hear Emma singing softly to herself before sleep, something about clouds and dreams and families that choose each other. Marcus thought about how his life had changed in the months since that fundraiser, how Victoria had walked into his world and somehow fit into spaces he hadn't even known were empty, and felt grateful for the courage it had taken both of them to try. 6 months after Victoria had shown up at Marcus's door that morning, they found themselves at the same park where they'd walked and talked for 4 hours on one of their early dates. But this time, Emma was with them, running ahead to the playground, while Marcus and Victoria followed at a more leisurely pace, their hands intertwined. The acquisition Victoria had been so worried about had gone through smoothly under her successor's leadership. The company was thriving, and her board had actually thanked her for having the wisdom to step back when she needed to. She'd found a new kind of success, one measured in piano lessons with Emma and quiet mornings in Marcus's apartment, and the feeling of being part of something bigger than her own achievements. Marcus had taken on a bigger client, one that Victoria had connected him with, but that he'd earned on his own merit, and the steady income meant he was looking at moving to a 2-bedroom apartment, where Emma could have her own room again. Victoria had offered to help financially, but Marcus had been firm about maintaining his independence, finding a balance between accepting support and maintaining his own agency. They'd established themselves as a unit, a family that was unconventional but deeply functional. Emma called Victoria by her first name, but introduced her to friends as her almost stepmom, which made Victoria tear up every time. They had dinner together most nights, alternating between Marcus's apartment and Victoria's penthouse, teaching Emma that home wasn't about where you lived but who you loved. Sarah's parents had been skeptical at first when Marcus had introduced Victoria, but even they had to admit that Emma was thriving, that she was happier and more secure than she'd been in years. Victoria had been gracious with them, understanding that their grief over losing Sarah was complicated, and slowly they'd begun to accept her as part of Emma's extended family. Now, watching Emma climb to the top of the jungle gym and wave at them excitedly, Marcus thought about how far they'd all come. "She wants to ask you something," Victoria said suddenly, pulling his attention back to her. "Emma?" Marcus asked. Victoria nodded. "She asked me last week if it would be okay if she called me Mom sometimes. Not all the time, because she knows Sarah was her mom first, but sometimes when it feels right. She wanted to know if I'd be okay with that, and if you'd be okay with it." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd be honored," Victoria said, her own voice thick with feeling, "but that we needed to talk to you about it first, make sure everyone was comfortable with however she wanted to define our relationship." Marcus looked at Emma, at this incredible little person who'd survived loss and change, and had somehow kept her heart open enough to love again. "Sarah would want that," he said finally. "She'd want Emma to have as many people loving her as possible. She'd want Emma to feel like she had a mom, even if it's not her." Victoria squeezed his hand. "I'm not trying to replace Sarah," she said. "I just want to be present, to be another person Emma can count on." "I know," Marcus said. "And Sarah would love you for that. Hell, I love you for that." They sat down on a bench, and Emma ran over a few minutes later, breathless and happy. "Did Victoria tell you?" she asked Marcus directly, "about what I want to call her?" Marcus pulled Emma onto his lap. "She did, and if that feels right to you, sweetheart, then it's right. You get to decide who your family is, and what you call them. Victoria has shown up for you every day since you met her, and that makes her your family in all the ways that matter." Emma beamed, then turned to Victoria. "Can I call you Mom?" she asked, suddenly. "Yes," Victoria said, opening her arms. Emma launched herself at her, and Victoria caught her, holding tight while tears streamed down her face. Marcus watched them, these two people he loved more than anything, and felt a sense of completeness he'd thought he'd lost forever when Sarah died. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of that uncertainty. They were building something real, something that honored the past while embracing the present, something that proved love was always a choice you made daily, deliberately, with your whole heart. Later, as the sun began to set and they walked back to the car with Emma between them, each holding one of her hands, Marcus thought about that morning when he'd woken up to find Victoria in his kitchen. She'd been wearing his shirt and looking terrified, about to tell him things that would change both their lives. He'd been frozen in that moment, not knowing whether to move forward or retreat, but something had made him choose to listen, to try to believe that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places. Now Victoria was part of their daily rhythm, their chosen family, proof that love was less about biology or circumstance, and more about showing up, staying present, and having the courage to build something new from the pieces of your past. Emma started singing in the car on the way home, making up words about families and promises and chocolate chip pancakes, and both Marcus and Victoria joined in, their voices blending together in a harmony that was imperfect but beautiful, just like everything else they'd built together. The story didn't end there, because real life never had neat endings, just continuing chapters where people kept choosing each other day after day. But in that moment, driving through the city with his daughter singing, and the woman he loved beside him, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years, not just hope, but joy, pure and uncomplicated and worth every risk they'd taken to get there. And when Victoria reached over to squeeze his hand at a stoplight, when Emma declared that they should all have ice cream for dinner because families that choose each other make their own rules, Marcus smiled and agreed, thinking that sometimes the best moments in life were the ones you never saw coming, the ones that woke you up and left you frozen until you found the courage to move forward into something beautiful and terrifying and completely, perfectly real.